no intro music. And that's because do something a little out of the ordinary here. I'm going to give a little preamble to this podcast. In it, I discuss the filter of the advice. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? As far as like things we share, things we say. And after I had recorded the podcast, I was curious to where that came from. I didn't know if it was something pulled out of philosophy, some old parable. But after doing a quick little Google search, it seems it comes from a poem in the the 1870s from Mary Ann Pietzker. And since I'm a total dork, I'm going to read that poem and then we'll hit the intro and we'll get into the podcast. But here we go. Oh, stay, dear child, one moment stay, before a word you speak that can do harm in any way, to the poor or to the weak, and never say of anyone what you'd not have said of you, you ask yourself the question, is the accusation true? And if 'tis true, for I suppose you would not tell a lie, before the failings you expose of friend or enemy, yet even then be careful very, pause in your words well weigh, and ask if it be necessary what you are about to say. And should it necessary be, at least you deem it so, you speak not unadvisedly of friend or even foe, till in your secret soul you seek for some excuse to find, and the thoughtless word you speak, ask yourself, is it kind? When you have asked these questions three, true, necessary, kind, ask them in all sincerity, I think that you will find it is no hardship to obey the command of our blessed Lord, no ill of any man to say, no, not a single word. So that's the poem from where that true, kind, necessary comes from, and now we'll jam on the pot of the day. Okay, so as I'm kind of cruising along here, one of the things I've wanted to do for a while with this podcast, and I maybe have started it or at least talked about in other podcasts, I would almost bet that is the case, is this concept of like sharing the best advice I've received. And this is important to me, and I think all of us sort of have these people in our lives. Oftentimes it's people we look up to, maybe grew up with, mentors that shared with us maybe a lot of advice, a single tidbit of advice that really stuck with us, and we probably wrote it down, and from time to time we revisit it or we try to pass it on to others. Or maybe it was somebody that, you just bumped into and they said something really profound or impactful to you. And for me, this is something like I count myself very lucky. I feel like I have received and just been in the company of incredible teachers and mentors, whether they've been a teacher or mentor for 60 seconds or, multiple years. I feel really fortunate in my life to have found a lot of those. And I've always joked, like, if I ever did have a skill in life, I feel like, cynically, I always joke, it's like, if there are coattails to ride and they're awesome, I'll find them. But, sincerely, I feel like if I did have a skill, it's really just being able to identify fantastic people to learn from. And I've always felt really lucky and blessed by that. So one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time is share, do this series, and we'll call this part one of the best advice I've ever received. And this first one I wanted to start with is cool because I think it's really great advice. I think it's also great not only because it provides like a cool North Star for how to sort of operate in life, but it's also a really challenging piece of advice. It's not just like a piece of advice that you can set it and forget it. It's a piece of advice that will constantly challenge you. And this originally came to me from Annie Sakamoto. And for anyone who doesn't know who Annie Sakamoto is, she, I would say, is kind of like a founding pillar of like the CrossFit ecosystem. Anybody who learned about CrossFit a long time ago, like I did on the interwebs, saw videos of Annie in the original Santa Cruz gym. She'd go on to run an affiliate in Santa Cruz. She, has coached forever. She's a multiple times games competitor, very successful masters athlete, seminar staff member, and really just anyone who's bumped into her, not even in those contexts, probably just knows her as really just wonderfully infectious, big smile, force of nature, just bright star in life. And I've always enjoyed my interactions with her. And one of the other things I really like about Annie, and I think sometimes this can be missed with people who have big personalities like she can have, or really like a gregarious personality, is she has what I call, and that, there are a lot of people that fall into this list, a subtle mind. And what I mean by subtle mind is like people who can kind of read between the lines of life. And, they are operating on frequencies and wavelengths and taking in things and picking up things that they don't really let on that they're taking on and picking up. Just very engaged observers, and just kind of like this really epic life situational awareness. So anyway, that subtle mind is a really cool quality. I should probably spend some time talking about that. But anyway, I wanted to share the advice. So her advice to me a long time ago, and I forgot, I wish I could remember the conversation, how this came up. But she had, we were talking about engaging with people and just how we present ourselves, how we interact with others. And she shared with this advice for things we do we have a filter for things we say? And her advice was, if it's not true, if it's not kind, and if it's not necessary, don't say it. True, kind, necessary. And this was something I think that, she's reminded me about, and we've talked about often when we bumped into each other. And I think it's a really beautiful piece of advice. If it's not true, if it's not kind, if it's not necessary, it doesn't need to be said. And, I think of some really simple life examples where this pops up. And like I said, one of the reasons I really like this advice and pushing things through this filter is that it really challenges you. And it challenges you both at your best and at your worst. One of the things I want to talk about in the future is like when you're kind of at your lowest, maybe you're being like negative or, for lack of a better term, just a giant poopy head, you comport yourself and you act in a certain way that can be really challenging for both yourself and other people around you. But at the same time, when you're at your highs, buzzing around, being excited, big, like super, just really like super engaged, you get the volume turned up to 11, that can also be really challenging for yourself and the people around you. And you get the momentum of that attitude and that emotion. And I don't know, sometimes it just causes the wheels to spin a little bit. And maybe we say some things that aren't true, kind, or necessary. So that's one of the reasons I really like this piece of advice, is that at all points of life, it puts your nose to the grindstone a little bit in terms of challenging you to really think about, what is the imprint you leave on the world? How do you interact with it? How do you process what's going on in the world? And then spit that back out. So one of the things that made me think of this is recently I was training with some friends, and I love banter. And that's not an excuse for this story, but it is true. I love the banter. I love back and forth. Always down for a little bit of shit talking, or a lot, or a metric ton of it. But anyway, training with some friends, and there's a new colleague I've kind of met through CrossFit, and she's fantastic, all in, great athlete. Actually, anyway, great athlete. Competed at a high level. And anyway, so we had done a workout together a while ago, and she smoked me at it, and it came up again, and we were talking about it, and I had basically said, we were talking about it, and I was like, oh, that workout that you didn't stand up your deadlifts in, even though you still beat me, and I totally meant it as a joke. Because I feel like, if you're in the conversation, it's exciting, people are kind of going back and forth, and I really, really did mean it as a joke. And it was one of those things, like, as fucking soon as I said it and it left my face, I was like, oh, I don't know if we're at that friendship level yet for me to say something like that. And I could tell, and I even followed up with, I could tell I had made ooh, that was kind of a dickhead move. And as soon as it, came out of my head, I was like, well, it's not true. It certainly wasn't kind. And it wasn't really necessary to move the conversation forward or get to a point or have some conclusion of the conversation or achieve some next step in the conversation. And the only reason I'm laughing is just because it's like, it's one of those things, and I could tell that I didn't like that I said it because the memory of me saying it is like still so vivid in my mind. Like I can remember like who was there and where people were standing and like what we were, just like all of the elements of the event. And it's a small thing, but probably in the grand scheme of things. But I could tell that it wasn't the right thing to say. I don't think she liked it. I could tell that I didn't like it after I said it. And like I said, this is a tiny thing, but what I like about this true, kind, necessary was, hey, could I have said something just as funny, at least to me, without saying that? Yeah, absolutely. And I was just sort of reacting to the situation rather than acting in it. So it was just that was a powerful reminder in a simple way of the true, kind, and necessary. And the other, this probably happens a lot in our lives. One of the other places where I see this come up is maybe you're having like a really strong discussion with somebody, or you're having like a debate, or maybe it's even an argument. And, it's challenging and there's a lot of friction, but you're progressing through the argument. And then all of a sudden, maybe either you or the other person just basically, says some sentence like, well, you remember that one time when you did X? You're kind of like derailing this thing to focus on some point of minutia. And that's where it's like, you might say something that's true. Maybe it's a kind thing to say, but it's certainly not necessary. The necessary one, I think, is one that can be really tricky. And it's one of the parts I like of this, because I think there are times where you're like, well, this thing could be true or it could be kind, but then you think about it and you're like, ooh, it's just not necessary to say that. It doesn't move us anywhere productive. It doesn't kind of get us to a conclusion or a next step. It doesn't really add to the conversation or the relationship. And a good example of this also, I think, is like people who just, and I fall victim to this, just sometimes like people who give obsequious amounts of praise. It's just like you're just giving praise just because, I don't know, like for no reason. You just constant fluff. It's like it's the empty calories of words of like, oh no, you're the greatest, you're the greatest, you're the greatest. And I think you look back on those things and it's like, well, if I want my words to have weight and I want my words to have meaning, I want people to take them seriously, I can't just be throwing them around unnecessarily. Like there are times to talk and share and interact and engage. And there are also times when you need to, give truth. And there are also times to be kind. And so that's one of the reasons I really like that advice and that filter, because like I said, it still challenges me to this day, and it pops up obviously in scenarios that have like a ton of gravity to them, like really important moments. Is this the thing that I'm about to say? Is it true? Is it kind? Or is it necessary? Or like the example I gave today, it can pop up in really small moments. And I think it's just cool to reflect on that. So I think about that one a lot. I've like kind of written that down in journals and books and on Post-it notes many times throughout my life. And I actually think I have shared a podcast on this before, but it's definitely, like I said, it's definitely worth revisiting. And, I challenge you maybe at the end of the day, and maybe I'll do this with the next podcast when I'm a little bit more static. But is write down 5 things you said throughout the day to somebody else. And actually, a really good way to do this would be like write down 3 things you said to somebody else. Write down 3 things that you said internally to yourself, or maybe out loud. And, just then write down for each one, was it true? Why or why not? Okay. Was it kind? Why or why not? Was it necessary? Why or why not? Just a cool way to kind of evaluate what we put out in the world, and maybe even give to ourselves. So there it is. Thank you, Annie Sakamoto, for true, kind, necessary. Talk to you soon.